Gurdjieff calls our ordinary state of consciousness sleep, in the same way that Christ calls it sleep when he says, "Watch, do not sleep." Ouspensky writes of this condition, saying, if we knew the quantity of wrong observations, wrong theories, wrong deductions and conclusions made in this state, this ordinary consciousness, we would cease to believe ourselves altogether. Dr. Spieth, in her book The Gurdjieff Work, observes that anyone who has difficulty accepting the notion that as we are, we have but few moments of true self-awareness ought to make a study of the loose jaws and vacant stares of people in public places and in situations where they don't know that they're being observed. According to the fourth way, the central obstacle to higher levels of consciousness is a phenomenon known as identification. Ouspensky describes it in this manner. In this state, identification, man has no separate awareness. He is lost in whatever he happens to be doing, feeling, or thinking. Because he is lost, immersed, not present to himself, this condition is known as a state of waking sleep. When we are identified, our attention is directed outward and we are lost to ourselves. Self-awareness, then, is a state in which we become aware of ourselves and are no longer hypnotized by the external event before us. There is yet a higher level of consciousness, which the work calls objective consciousness. And in this state, we come into contact with the real world from which we are cut off by the senses. Some psychologists deny the existence of higher states of consciousness, dismissing them as dream states. And it's very strange that Sigmund Freud, who discovered so much about subconscious states, should not have postulated the existence of higher states as well as lower states. But in order to reach the more silent areas of our consciousness, we must get beyond the noisy regions of our minds in which we spend so much of our time. The attainment of higher levels of consciousness is closely related to certain religious practices which are found in all cultures, such as meditation, contemplation. These are difficult paths to tread because our attention is always being caught by the ceaseless chattering in our heads. Yet it is possible to become receptive to a state of pure consciousness without thought, a state in which truth is revealed to us directly, without the use of words. In order to see clearly the roots of our psychological distortions, the fourth way defines two aspects of the individual: essence and personality. Essence comprises the inborn traits that we come into the world with. Personality is all that we've acquired, imitations, attitudes, and so forth. All that is learned, both unconsciously through imitation and through acquired likes and dislikes, constitutes this outer part of the person, that which is changed by outer circumstances. And personality is indeed necessary as we grow up and face the world and learn to act in the world. But something happens as we develop it in school and through the culture's impact on us. The essence that we see in little children becomes atrophied and ceases to grow. And this means that with a quick and early growth of personality, growth of essence can practically stop at a very young age, and as a result we see men and women externally quite grown up, but whose essence remains at the age of 10 or 12. Through the practice of self-remembering, we can separate ourselves from the imitations and pretenses of our personality, which have come to enslave us, and begin to return to who we actually are. Such a return to our essential nature is accompanied by a sense of liberation unlike any other. To thyself be true is the first commandment on the way to self-development and the attaining of higher consciousness. According to Rodney Collin, one of Ouspensky's primary students who started his own school in Mexico, the fundamental abnormality in human beings lies precisely in the divergence between personality and essence. The more nearly we know ourselves for who we are, the more we approach wisdom. The more our imagination about ourselves diverges from who we actually are, the more insane we become. He writes, Unless a man first finds himself, finds his own essential nature and destiny, and begins from them, all his efforts and achievements will be built on the sand of personality, and at the first serious shock, the whole structure will crumble, perhaps destroying him in the fall. For Rodney Collin, the soul is the totality of moments of self-awareness. If you think back to all those special moments in your life, before beauty, before tragedy, those intensified moments of consciousness are in fact the life of the soul. Yet they come and go without any control. And once again, the reason that this self-awareness is so difficult to attain is that it is dependent on the conscious use of attention. And sleep precisely is the hypnotizing of this attention. Maurice Nicoll tells us in his commentaries that this state of self-remembering, of self-awareness, this third state of consciousness, creates the following. What you took as yourself begins to look like a prison house far away in the valley beneath you. That's an expression of a state of consciousness liberated from the sleep in which we generally operate. These flashes of greater consciousness are the unexpected result of strenuous efforts made in order not to lose ourselves in the rush of outer circumstances, and to be cleansed of the poisons of negativity, as well as to maintain a heightened awareness grounded in the present moment. The student is to reach a point where he or she can make the choice not to react automatically to external stimuli. This requires going against the grain, against long-established habits and self-indulgences. The question is as basic as, can you choose not to be angry in the face of something that makes you angry, rather than being wasted in such an outburst? The energy accumulated through this effort can be made available for a moment of intensified consciousness. Such a moment can flood you with peace, or quiet joy, or a sense of profound liberation. And interestingly enough, such moments often occur in very paradoxical events. So self-remembering combined with the insights of objective self-observation assists in the creation of a balanced individual who is not completely under the sway of his or her inborn nature and acquired habits. In attempting to make the machine work right, to balance it, it is necessary to change attitudes and behavior that have developed over years of wrong functioning. Ouspensky told his students that it is only when we realize that life is taking us nowhere that it begins to have meaning. When life is taking us nowhere, it begins to have meaning. When we are no longer focused on success and on all of the things that society requires of us, but learn how to use life for another purpose, then we begin to discover true meaning. Maurice Nicoll gives us a hint of these first stages of real change. Gradual withdrawal of energy from the customary, easily resentful and brittle feeling of I is accompanied by a gradual new and broader feeling of I, as if one were living in a larger place. It is like being introduced to a new civilization, to another form of life. He points out that by using the inner camera of self-observation, we begin to open a mind above the level of the sensual mind. And here is where psychological experiences of the fourth way lead to their numinous and spiritual character. This same idea is found in the teachings of Carl Friedrich Graf Durkheim, informed by Zen Buddhism, Christian mysticism, and psychotherapy. Durkheim writes of these experiences of higher awareness in this way. He says, "It is no longer the old I, but a wider, more comprehensive one. We do not lose ourselves in it, but rather, on the contrary, truly find ourselves. A new breathing space, scope and sphere of action opens up, and we realize only then how confined we had been before, how imprisoned and isolated." Self-remembering, then, is a process of being lifted out of our ordinary sense of self into a purified, detached space well known to those long practiced in meditation. But in the fourth way, this birth of new awareness can be accomplished while one crosses a city street or takes out the trash. Nevertheless, despite the practical approach of the work, self-remembering remains as intangible and paradoxical as any spiritual exercise. Reminiscent of the Zen koan, Rodney Collin told his students that we cannot remember ourselves until we forget ourselves. And at the height of his powers of understanding, he united the fourth way with the wisdom of all times and places when he said, "To feel beauty, to feel truth, that is self-remembering. Self-remembering is the awareness of the presence of God." The idea that we are not awake but live in a partial dream state, from which we can awaken, opens onto radically new horizons. The illusions we foster concerning ourselves melt in the light of increased consciousness, and we awaken to new dimensions of reality that set us free. We are then able to relate to the world around us without our usual defenses and masks and confusion, which constitute so much of human interaction. We also become capable of a new kind of compassion. Ultimately, this third state of consciousness, which is our birthright, frees us from the unnecessary agonies of a little ego always struggling for self-importance and gratification, and it awakens us to new insight and understanding. The world becomes a different place, and we become far more than our imaginary selves ever dreamt of. And the potential for happiness, fulfillment, and genuine usefulness to humanity are now tangible realities. This use of attention is similar to the watch of the heart of early Eastern Christian spirituality and the remembrance of God of the Sufi mystics. To be aware of a higher reality while dealing with ordinary reality requires an effort of awareness, detachment, and concentration, which is the result of long practice. These experiences of vaster consciousness have been tasted by everyone, as I said before, and we often find ourselves in an atmosphere very familiar to us, though so rare in our adult experience. The disciplines of the work eventually make the practitioner receptive to longer, more frequent encounters with these regenerative and illuminating events. These are the transformative moments that people have sought in drugs and voyages to exotic lands, in thrills, in love and intense emotion. On the foundations of objective self-observation and liberation from constant entanglement, identification with the circumstances of the outer world, these experiences become the very oxygen of our souls. In proportion as we learn to remember ourselves, our actions acquire a meaning and consistency which is not possible as long as our attention moves only from one fascination to another. The premise that we are not awake but live in a partial dream state opens entirely new horizons in dealing with the problems of life. At their core, the originators of the fourth way as we know it today were spiritual men in the true sense of the term. Work on oneself leads to a liberation which can be compared to the enlightenment and divinization of more religious methods. But writings on the fourth way have generally remained secular, with the notable exception of Maurice Nicoll and Rodney Collin. Left with the outer dimension of the work, the fourth way can be reduced to the development of personal powers and dehumanizing attitudes. To be somewhat liberated from our mechanicalness and the illusion of unity can allow a person to manipulate those who are still caught in the tyranny of waking sleep. But the fourth way is meant ultimately to transcend its own magnificent thought structures so that every student can find for himself or herself the life of a higher consciousness which constantly seeks us if we would only ready ourselves in the effort of awakening and receive its treasures of wisdom and regeneration.